Hey everyone, I'm Aaron Porras, and thanks for joining us for ILTV's weekly program, One-on-One with Alan Dershowitz. We want to give you, our viewers, the chance to have your questions answered by Professor Dershowitz, one of America's greatest legal minds. He's a leading expert on criminal and constitutional law, civil liberties, and the Arab-Israeli conflict. And today, we have a special edition of the show where we recapture the finest moments in commentary, bringing you the best of One-on-One with Alan Dershowitz.
Well, Ambassador Friedman, barely a half year has passed since President Trump kept a campaign promise made by every Republican and Democratic candidate in recent decades and actually moved the embassy to Jerusalem. I remember, Alan, how you felt a palpable sense of history as you witnessed the event with your grandson from the VIP seats. So now, Mr. Ambassador, that the electricity has died down a bit, our audience would appreciate if you'd share your perspectives on how this move is playing out and what have we learned and how will this continue to affect the peace process?
Well, first of all, thank God, notwithstanding all the predictions of the world coming to an end, we're still here. The world didn't come to an end. And by and large, with some notable exceptions, primarily along the Gaza Strip, which was violent that day and would have been violent that day regardless and was violent in the past and continues to be violent. The world accepted it as a legitimate decision by one sovereign nation to accept the capital of another sovereign nation. And life moved on, and we've spoken to ambassadors and leaders throughout the world, and we're finding a high level of respect for the decision. I think there'll be more. I think there'll be more over the next 18 months. It was a great message for the president to send in the current environment, because what he said is, number one, I'm going to keep my promise. Number one, number two, my word is something that people should listen to very carefully. And number three, when it comes to rogue nations or bad actors threatening us and telling us what we can or can't do, it's all noise and it doesn't play into my thinking. And the Jerusalem decision was relatively small next to Iran or next to what we're facing in North Korea. But it was a message that I think reverberated throughout the world, and I think put the president in a very good position vis-a-vis the challenges that we face around the world.
I agree completely. I think it was a brilliant diplomatic move. I also think it was the perfect response to the Obama administration's malicious decision to declare that the Jewish holy places in Jerusalem were illegally occupied, when the Obama administration, as a parting gift and as an act of rage, really against Prime Minister Netanyahu, allowed the Security Council resolution of December 2016 to pass. It was that changed the status quo of Jerusalem and made peace much more difficult. It'd be very, very difficult for Israel to negotiate to try to get back the Kotel, to try to get back the access roads to Hebrew University, to try to get back the Jewish quarter. So I think the decision to recognize Jerusalem as the capital offset the negative of the 2016 Security Council resolution and made it easier now to try to negotiate about Jerusalem. As the president has said, this doesn't preclude the possibility of some kind of Palestinian capital under the right circumstances in Jerusalem as well. Jerusalem is a large and diverse city. So I think my own sense, it was a win-win from every point of view. I'm proud to have supported the president on that issue. I'm proud to have answered his questions when he actually asked me for some ideas before he did that. And I think he did absolutely the right thing with the help and the assistance of the ambassador. I know who pressed for that very hard. So I think it was a brilliant move with almost no downside.
And we were delighted to host you there for what was, I'm sure you'll agree, a great ceremony.
Hey, let's talk about the anticipation of President Trump's unveiling of the deal of the century. Now, most recently, America announced it would stop supporting UNRWA, and then more recently, it said it will close the Palestinian office in Washington, D.C., until they get serious about negotiating. So we recently came across a series of brilliant op-eds written by a PhD candidate at King's College London. I caught up with the author, who incidentally is named Avi Yeager, and he's working at the IDC Herzliya, where he manages the Argov Fellows Program, named for the late Ambassador Shlomo Argov. So not surprisingly, Avi actually at one point served with my own, talking about young leadership, he served as an officer with my own son in the IDF. So I'd like to ask you, Uzi, a question. This will lead us into the question about leadership. And Avi paraphrased a famous saying made by President Reagan in which he urges Abbas to just say yes. So let's hear from him.
Shalom, Professor Dershowitz. The argument that I make is that throughout the years, Palestinian leadership thought that time is working for them, or in fact, time is working against them. From the Oslo Accords to the Camp David Summit to the Annapolis Conference of 2008, the Palestinians have been asking for more. In reality, they have been offered less. 43% of mandatory Palestine in 1947, less than 20% in Camp David, and now they're offered even less, a confederation between a Palestinian and a Jordanian state. Even Arab countries have started letting go of the Palestinian cause. Shared security interests and growing demand for Israeli technologies in cyber and water desalination have brought Arab countries closer to Israel's doorstep and further away from the Palestinian cause. In my op-ed, I ask, when will the Palestinian leadership wake up and start saying yes?
The Palestinian cause,
Yes,
viewed objectively, is a third or fourth level human rights cause. Certainly not nearly as strong as the cause of the Kurds, not nearly as strong as the Tibetans. These are really displaced and disenfranchised people who have never been offered the opportunity of statehood. The Palestinians were offered statehood in 1937, 38, 1947, 48, essentially 1967, essentially 2000, 2001, 2008, and they have never said yes to opportunities. The only reason the Palestinian cause is front and center in the world is because the nation state of the Jewish people, Israel, is perceived to be their oppressors. Take, for example, Jeremy Corbyn. He claims to be a human rights activist. He never speaks out on the other causes involving human rights, only on the cause of the Palestinians. Or many on the left only speak out on the cause of the Palestinians. It's not because they love the Palestinians, it's because they hate the nation state of the Jewish people. And I think that's becoming old news, and I think the Palestinians really do have a tremendous interest in now coming to the negotiating table. And President Trump, I agree with some of what he does, I disagree with some of what he does, but I think putting pressure on the Palestinians through UNRWA and through the office in Washington can possibly produce positive results. Look, I think the movement of the embassy to Jerusalem proved a positive result because the rest of the Sunni Arab world was fairly silent about it, and it took a very important issue off the table. And I think the time is right for the Palestinians. They will get a good deal if they come and negotiate. And if they don't, this stalemate will continue for many more years. It's a self-inflicted wound by the leadership of the Palestinian Authority. And it's a wound that can be healed if they come to the negotiating table and get a good deal. As Prime Minister Netanyahu said, it will require painful compromises on both sides. Israel has already indicated a willingness to make painful compromises. The Palestinians must be willing to make the same painful compromises as well.
Uzi?
I basically agree, and I want to say what we, the Israelis, is to do in such a situation. And what is the situation? Alan described it pretty fair. There is no partner, first of all. The whole peace process should be called now, I don't know, the rest in peace process, okay? And this is because there is no partner for it. I spend a lot of hours with Abu Mazen, Mahmoud Abbas. And he is not a partner to any agreement which starts with, you know, with the sentence, end of conflict, no more claims. No more claims. Nothing he can say yes about it, Abu Mazen, and he is not even a real leader of the Palestinians. He is living, let's face it, on the Israeli bayonets, I'd say now. If there was an election, a free election in the West Bank and Judah and Samaria, the Hamas will score more than 80%. So there is no partner. The Hamas is a terror organization. Abu Mazen is a no leader. I don't know what will happen next and what we should do now. And by the way, it's not an issue in the Middle East anymore. There is a war in the Middle East, a regional war with international aspects. But for many years, they say the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is the root of all evil in the Middle East. Everybody understands today that this is not the root of not only the root of all evil, it's not really the problem of all of the countries in the Middle East. So if it's not the problem, it's not the solution either. But it's very important for us because we are living with the Palestinians. So what we should do now, it's not give up and start a kind of a bottom-up process. It will take years, including education, incitement. We have to work against the incitement, the education, the economical issue, and hope for a better day.
Well, Professor Dershowitz, we are honored and delighted to have as your special guest one of the greatest heroes of our lifetime, Natan Sharansky. Natan was a leader of the human rights movement in the former Soviet Union. Together with people like Andrei Sakharov, Natan was also a leader in the struggle, of course, for the Soviet Jewry and a prisoner of conscience who served 9 out of a 13-year sentence on trumped-up charges before being released and coming to Israel. In 1996, he established the Israel B'Aliyah Party to help new immigrants and served in 4 successive Israeli governments as a member of Knesset, a minister, and deputy prime minister. Mr. Sharansky just stepped down after 9 years as chairman of the Jewish Agency for Israel. This year, Natan was awarded the prestigious Israel Prize and is the only living non-American to receive the Congressional Medal of Honor and the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Natan, it's wonderful to have you here.
Thank you for having me. Thank you,
It's
Alan.
wonderful. Thank you. You're, as you know, one of my great heroes. As I've said, one of the great moments of my life was when I first physically met you after working on your case for so many years, and you threw your arms around me and you whispered in my ear, Baruch Matir Asurim.
Wow.
And never forget that. It was one of the great, great moments of my life. I also describe it as the largest legal fee I ever got, even though I represented you pro bono. Just to hear those words from your mouth, looking at you and seeing you healthily having survived the gulag, something that your imprisoners did not want you to do. It was one of the great moments of Jewish history.
Thank you, Alan. I felt very relaxed in prison because I knew I can rely on you guys.
So let's get started. Natan, would you tell us about your personal struggle, what inspired you and sustained you through these hard years? And Alan, then we'd like to hear a little bit more about your battle on behalf of a man you were only to meet years later. Natan?
Well, I was absolutely assimilated Soviet Jew. I had nothing Jewish in my life. No holidays, no history, no language, no faith. I had one very Jewish thing, a lot of anti-Semitism. And then, thanks to Israel, thanks to its victory in 1967, we discovered that there is a country that we can be proud of, that thinks about us, fights for us, and then it gives you strength to start fighting for your rights, for the rights of other Jews, and then for the rights of everybody. And then, in this process of struggle, you discover there is Jewish people from all over the world who want to help you. And it's altogether this discovery of your country, of your people, of your history that you want to be part of it. It gives you a lot of strength. So when I was arrested and sentenced to prison for being spokesman of our movement, I was absolutely confident that whatever KGB tells me, Jews don't stop fighting for one day for my release. And that's what was giving me strength and confidence. And that the fact that the leading young lawyers like Alan Dershowitz or Irvin Kotler, or the leading rabbis and the leading politicians are part of the struggle, that's what was giving me strength and confidence.
So our first question today comes from Tal Or-Cohen, a lawyer who moved to Israel from Washington, D.C. She was an Argo Fellow at the Herzliya Interdisciplinary Center, and she's been following closely the Senate confirmation hearings and is actually quite interested in the process, which she believes is at least as important, if not more important, than the actual outcome itself. And not just in this case, but with repercussions for the entire justice system. So let's hear from her.
Hi, Professor Dershowitz. This is Tal Or-Cohen. I made Aliyah from Maryland in 2009. Today, I'm a lawyer in Tel Aviv. I wanted to hear your perspective on the recent Kavanaugh hearings and the increasing role of the court of public opinion. On the one hand, we have these hearings. On the other hand, we have proven biases in the justice system against people of color. Is it true that the presumption of innocence is an endangered species today? And relating to that, the court of public opinion seems to be an increasingly inhospitable place for Israel, specifically becoming a polarizing topic between Democrats and Republicans, and more importantly, their voters. On a recent trip to the United States, a friend of mine said, "It's hard today to be a Democrat and to support Israel." I wanted to hear your take on this, and also, has it been more difficult to make the case for Israel, considering the recent approval of the nation-state law?
Well, I like very much the way you relate the two issues. They're obviously not directly related, but burden of proof, presumptions of innocence when it comes to accusations of sexual misconduct, and burdens of proof and presumptions of innocence when it comes to allegations against Israel, many of which are believed in the face of contrary evidence. You know, we live at a time when truth is very much being challenged. The extreme left in America doesn't believe in truth. Everybody has their own truth. Who do you believe, me or your lying eyes, as Groucho Marx once put it? And I think that's become an issue on college campuses, particularly around the country. No matter how much evidence you present on an issue, they say, look, truth is an individualized factor. It grows out of identity politics. It grows out of who you are, not what the facts are. And I think we're seeing that play out both in the court of public opinion when it comes to Israel and in the confirmation process in general. Look, I wrote a piece for the Wall Street Journal the other day in which I challenged the notion that the confirmation process for Kavanaugh is simply just a job interview. First of all, if it were a job interview, it would be so unfair because almost half of the people who have to decide whether to give him the job decided against doing it the day he was nominated without hearing one scintilla of evidence. But then once he was accused of the most horrendous crimes imaginable, including participation, active participation in drugging women and lining them up for gang rapes, and he's being compared, you know, to some of the worst offenders in the world, people who are who have already been convicted, Bill Cosby, then the process shifts from, if it ever was a job interview, to a mini trial. And I think you need process, and I think you need proof by clear and convincing evidence. For me, this is an education moment. Let me give you an example. This woman named Julie Sedgwick, who claimed to have evidence and witnesses, none of the witnesses have appeared, that Kavanaugh and his friend Judge were actively involved in spiking drinks and giving drugs and then raping helpless women. She has to be thoroughly investigated. If she made an honest mistake and it happened and maybe it was somebody else, that's one thing. But if she sat there and did the Hamlet moment, to be or not to be a perjuring felon, to falsely accuse somebody deliberately of a crime you know he didn't commit, this woman has to be prosecuted and has to be imprisoned. We have to send a double message to people in our society. One, you do not engage in sexual assault no matter how old you are. There's no excuse for a 17-year-old to engage in sexual assault. That's message number one. Number two, an equally important message, I emphasize, an equally important message is do not falsely accuse anybody of a crime as heinous as rape. And if you do either of those things, there will be consequences. Right now, there are massive consequences for young men or men of every age who rape or assault. That's a good thing. But there are no consequences for women who, with or without their lawyers' help, make up stories for financial gain, for revenge against innocent people. That has to change. Moving to Israel, I think the same thing is true. If you have credible assertions about misconduct on the part of Israeli soldiers, etc., make them. But if you are proved to have made false charges, as Hamas has over and over and over again, then your credibility must be questioned. Students for Justice for Palestine over and over again have leveled false charges of Israel. These are blood libels. And there has to be a process of proof because truth is important. The marketplace of ideas is important. We just cannot allow truth to become something that is subjective and based on identity politics rather than evidence-based science.
Well, Alan, you've written extensively and appeared on all the U.S. news outlets. Do you see this process taking a dangerous turn? For example, the case of Georgetown professor Christine Fair, who wrote a provocative tweet, which resulted in her being kicked off Twitter. And also, as you mentioned, the ACLU's taking out a video in which they show pictures of Judge Kavanaugh with, right before convicted felon Bill Cosby.
Look, that professor at Georgetown deserves to be so attacked. If she had made the opposite argument, if she had used language like that against African Americans or against women or against Muslim Americans, she would be so despised and so attacked. But since the attack is on old white men, then she gets a pass. And you can't give people passes for that kind of comment. Look, she has free speech rights to say what she wants, but we have free speech rights to attack her and condemn her. And I think there has to be a single standard. If she would have been fired for making these kinds of statements against other groups, she should be fired for making statements against white men. I wouldn't support that, but the equity has to be identical. So I think we have to have a single standard. As far as the ACLU is concerned, it should change its name from the American Civil Liberties Union to the Anti-Civil Liberties Union. What happened is, when I was on the national board of the ACLU, it had a small budget. It defended unpopular people neutrally. Once Trump was elected, its budget went, as I understand it, from 20 million to 130 million, and it's chasing the money. It's chasing Hollywood money, and the only way it gets Hollywood money is if it abandons civil liberties and simply devotes itself full-time to getting Trump, getting his nominees, supporting candidates on the left, opposing Supreme Court nominees, all of which are in violation of its traditions and its mandate. So the ACLU was not only stopped being a civil liberties organization, it's turned into an anti-civil liberties organization. It now says that if there's any suspicion, that's enough. Imagine if it said that during the McCarthy period, if it said that a person fired from a job because of suspicion of communism, well, it's only a job interview. And if there's any suspicion that he might at any point have been a communist, that's enough to get rid of him from his job. They never would have said that. And I think that double standard has to be criticized and condemned.
All right, that wraps up this edition of One-on-One with Alan Dershowitz. If you'd like Professor Dershowitz to answer your questions, please go to ILTV.tv or our Facebook page and submit them. We'll see you again next week.